Welcome back, distinguished guests and respected participants. I am Aliza Fatima, a final year student in the Department of International Relations at University of Karachi. We have officially started our first formal working session, which will commence once everyone is seated. Okay. The agenda for this initial session centers around a comprehensive exploration of the conceptual framework of regional connectivity, addressing various aspects to develop a deeper understanding of the political and structural dynamics within the region. To chair the session, I am honored to extend an invitation to Professor Sikandar Mehdi, an esteemed figure and former chairperson of the Department of International Relations at University of Karachi. Sir, would you please join us? I regret to inform that our first speaker, Dr. Christian Wagner from the German Institute of International and Security Affairs, will not be able to join us. However, I invite our second speaker, Dr. Farhan Hanif Siddiqui, who is an associate professor at Quaid-e-Azam University. He will enlighten us on the conflict cooperation dichotomy in the South Asian region. Lastly, I extend a warm welcome to Dr. Rabia Akhtar, who is the Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences from the University of Lahore. Thank you all for your presence. This session is pivotal in laying the foundation for the subsequent discussions throughout the two-day conference, which will shape the direction for the future discussions. Following the presentations, we will engage in a question and answer session. Now I yield the floor to Mr. Mehdi so that he can initiate the session. Thank you, sir. We need a mic on the stage, please.
So thank you very much. The Department of International Relations for organizing this program. I will just start the official session by requesting Dr. Farhan Siddiqui to present his paper. You have a brief bio of the speakers, but let me add that Farhan was my student. I have taught him, and I feel very proud of him. Not only because he has joined the profession in which I was and I am, but also because, let me say, without any fear of any contest about my opinion, that at the moment he is one of the most leading international relations experts in our field. So that makes me really proud. And it's over to Dr. Farhan.
Thank you, sir, for the very, very kind introduction. I'm absolutely honored. Professor Sikandar Mehdi is one professor that I've learned a lot from during my student days. Professor Shaista is here, and Professor Mone Semer and others are also on their way. So I'm absolutely, absolutely happy to be in Karachi and to be amongst all of you. Thankful also to my good friend and colleague, Dr. Naeem Ahmed, for inviting me here, for organizing this very interesting and useful conference on the issue of regional connectivity in South Asia. And thankful also to the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung for their kind invitation, warmth and hospitality. Now, the topic as assigned asks me to speak about the conflict cooperation dichotomy in South Asia. And thankfully, this is a topic which I've written about in recent months. So I published a paper on contemplating avenues of peace between India and Pakistan, and the arguments that I presented in this paper are the arguments that I'll basically make use of here. But before I come to that bit, and of course I hope I make sense to all of you and myself as well, I want to approach this concept of dichotomy within the topic. What does dichotomy actually mean, and what do I understand and what do I precisely mean when we speak about conflict and cooperation? And my talk today, it is largely embedded within the conflict resolution and peace studies literature. That's a subject that I do, that's a subject that I love, that's a subject that I teach at Qaid-e-Azam. And I must state outrightly that I have a very strong, profound normative preference for peace, conflict resolution, and stability and cooperation in South Asia. So it is from that perspective that I will make the arguments. So understanding dichotomy, what does dichotomy mean? Now, dichotomy as a form, as an element of understanding socio-political reality, basically argues or sees the world through binaries. So we are always making these assessments between what is good and what is evil, about what is right and what is wrong, or even conflict and cooperation, or love and hate, or emancipation and pain. And when we are making those kind of binaries, or when we are invoking those kind of dichotomous viewpoints, what we are doing is that we are taking these two categories, let's say war and peace, or love and hate, or differences and reconciliation, or right and wrong and good and evil, as two analytically independent spheres of reality. And when we invoke these two analytically independent spheres of reality, the outcome that usually comes out of these binaries or out of these dichotomies is the reality of conflict and violence. So you must be very familiar with the clash of civilizations thesis, Huntington's. That invokes a binary, that invokes a dichotomy. And when you invoke that dichotomy in binary, the outcome will always be violence and war. Or if you go to the larger realist or the neo-realist literature within international relations, there are always these dichotomies, these binaries. And when you invoke them, when you frame them, the outcome will always be violence and war. The alternative interpretation, something that I've been reading upon recently, is another way of looking at dichotomy, is this other viewpoint of looking at binaries. And this comes to us from the Chinese tradition. So within the Chinese cultures, Chinese civilization, there's a religion called Taoism and Taoism. Taoism or Taoism as it is called, and it invokes the principle of what is called as yin-yang. Now, this principle is really interesting coming from China, because what it argues that yes, there are polar opposites, right and wrong, and lightness and darkness, and heaven and hell, or man and woman in fact, or love and hate, but that these binaries are interwoven within each other. They're interdependent on each other. And the fundamental source or the fundamental lesson that you learn from these Chinese cultural tradition, Taoism, is not to seek violence, but to seek harmony and stability. So that is what the goal of human society should be, that we live in a world of contradictions, we live in a world of polar opposites, but the fundamental goal of human society and human civilization should be to seek that harmony, should be to seek that stability. And this is the perspective that I'll basically make use of. Now, how is this relevant, you might ask, for India and Pakistan? And I'll come to India and Pakistan in just a moment. But I'll start generically from the kind of international politics that we have today. So we are invoking the argument, rightly so, that China is this rising power, that a new great game is underway, that a new great power strategic competition between the US and China will be the next defining feature of international politics. We invoke the analogy of the Thucydide trap, and all of that is perfectly right or true. But take this fact that last year, trade between US and China was close to $700 billion. Doesn't make sense. And that is why these binaries are interwoven with each other. So at one point in time, US and China are rivals of each other. but they also do trade with each other. Doesn't make sense. That's a complex reality that I'm trying to get at. Take up India and China. Geostrategic competition, geopolitical competitors, absolutely fine, absolutely true. But China-India trade last year was close to $125 billion. It crossed $100 billion last year. So at one end of the extreme, they are competitors, but at the other end of the spectrum, they're also, so to speak, collaborating, trading, doing business with each other. And that's the complex bit of reality, trying to seek harmony, trying to seek stability, which these Chinese, I think, cultural tradition basically invokes. I think is absolutely interesting and useful. Last week, there was this very interesting summit between President Xi Jinping and Joe Biden. And if you look at the statement of the Chinese president, he's actually invoking the argument about harmony and stability. It's a far more refreshing take on international politics, because what he's saying is that we as he's telling the Americans and the world at large, that we have two options available to us. Either we go down the road of zero-sum competition and we destroy each other and we destroy human civilization, or the other route where we acknowledge that yes, we have differences, that there is competition, we have conflicts, but that we use our ingenuity to resolve these conflicts, to manage these conflicts, and again do something good for human civilization or human societies globally. And I think that's a more refreshing take. And look at President Biden's statements. It was all about, no, China is a revisionist power. We have to protect the smaller states of the Southeast Asian region from the threat that China poses. And the US, and invoking the binary again, that we champion the cause of democracy, we champion the cause of human rights, we champion the cause of peace, while on the other hand you have China, which is basically a threat to democracy, and even said that President Xi Jinping was a dictator. So this is how international politics, and I think these statements were really useful. Now coming to South Asia, and when I invoke South Asia, I'll principally concentrate on the India-Pakistan conflict dyad, because until and unless you resolve the India-Pakistan conflict dyad, you cannot make progress in South Asia. So the question is, and I'll pose a number of questions. So the question basically is, how do India and Pakistan, given their state of affairs, how do they move beyond this zero-sum logic? How do they move beyond strategic competition? How do they move beyond violence and war? And how do they find harmony and stability in their bilateral relations? Now to begin with, again, yin-yang, the complexity or the intermeshing of conflict and cooperation. That yes, India and Pakistan are enemies of each other, they are geopolitical competitors, but at various points in time, if you look at India-Pakistan relations, there has always been a very strong tendency to associate with each other. So the need or the element of cooperation is embedded within their relationship. It's not all about conflict. Periods of conflict have been more than periods of cooperation, but you cannot dismiss the periods of cooperation. So let me start from a very recent, I'll just give one example, no more, given the time. So let me start with the most recent example. Something remarkable happened in South Asia, and something extraordinary happened in South Asia. December 2015, when the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi landed in Lahore. Do you remember? All of you remember? So he came on a private visit. It was not a diplomatic visit, and he came to attend the then Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif's granddaughter's wedding. So he flew from Delhi, he went over to Kabul, and from Kabul he was going back to Delhi, and suddenly he landed in Lahore to attend the Nawaz Sharif's granddaughter's wedding. Now Narendra Modi, for us, and rightly so, a polarizing figure in India, the butcher of Gujarat, and absolutely right, and spreading hate against minorities, against Muslims, right? Fomenting trouble and discrimination in Kashmir as well. But the same Narendra Modi, when he takes off from Delhi to go to Kabul, he makes a really, really interesting statement. And the statement is, and this is Narendra Modi, he's saying, I envision a South Asia where I can have breakfast in Kabul, tea in Lahore, and dinner in Delhi. It's truly remarkable. मुझे समझ नहीं है कि इतनी ingenuity आ कैसे गई South Asia. Really surprised, right? So breakfast in Kabul, tea in Lahore, and dinner in Delhi. Regional connectivity. So this is the South Asia that I see. And this is the South Asia that I want for the South Asians, right? And that was a vision, of course, that was acceded to, that was accepted by the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif as well. So the need to associate, to come together, to trade, to do business, this is embedded within the relationship. And a very holistic conflict lens of understanding India-Pakistan relations, I think that's a bad, erroneous take on the subject. Now, what has happened recently? And I'll try and answer the difficult question. That we know what has happened since 2019, and India-Pakistan relations have went completely downhill. So the point is, where do we go from here? Or how do we break the logjam? And how do we move India and Pakistan towards harmony and stability? That's the million-dollar question, if you will. Now, before I come and answer this question, just a quick footnote, because we have some time as well, one speaker is missing out. So when I make the argument for conflict resolution, when I make the argument for peace, or when I make the argument about using this literature in order to understand India-Pakistan relations, the most important thing to understand, and I think this is where conflict resolution theorists and practitioners are completely misunderstood, and this is that when they're invoking peace, they're not saying that we should create a world in which there is an absence of conflicts. So conflict resolution theorists, peace activists, that would be idealism. They're not idealists, right? So they're saying as long as human beings, human societies survive, human beings and human societies will always be impacted by conflict. The only ingenuity or improvisation that human beings can do and should do is to learn to resolve these conflicts without recourse to war and violence. That's the lesson that comes around, right? So it's not about ending conflict. So if the Kashmir issue is resolved tomorrow, do not mean that conflicts between India and Pakistan will end. They'll erupt in business, trade, finance, other issue areas. The only commitment that India and Pakistan do is to agree, right, that we have these conflicts and we will resolve these conflicts without recourse to war and violence. So our Vice Chancellor this morning was giving an example, where has this taken place? Where countries have learned to resolve their conflicts without making recourse to war and violence. We always invoke the example of the European Union, and that's absolutely fine. But there is another region in the world which we always forget, which transcended and transformed its reality from one of conflict and violence to one of resolving conflicts without making recourse to war and violence. And that's an example from the global south. And that is the example of ASEAN. So the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, if you look at their history in the 60s, it was similar: bilateral hostilities, conflict, violence, war. 69 they formed the ASEAN. By the 80s and 90s, they have a commitment for the ASEAN way. They institutionalized the norms of cooperation between all these states, and these are countries primarily from the global south. They were languishing in poverty and malnutrition and whatnot, but they were able to transcend and transform that reality, right? So from a community which was embedded within the horrors of a security dilemma, they transformed that vision 30, 40, 60 years now into that of a security community. And if you're familiar with the literature of the security community, it simply argues it's a no-war community. That yes, we have conflicts, and we'll continue to have conflicts, but we'll resolve them without recourse to war. So let me answer this question now, after the footnote, that what can India and Pakistan do? It's a very difficult question after 2019. So I'll answer this question not by saying what India and Pakistan can do, please bear with me, but what India and Pakistan can do, but to argue what they're doing now, what they have done in the recent past, and whether what they're doing and what they have done in the recent past, whether that serves the interest of both states. That whether the policies that they're pursuing now, whether they are self-fulfilling, that it gets them what they need, or whether they are self-defeating. So let me start with India's position. So 2019, the BJP government, we all know, August 2019, they revoked Kashmir's autonomous status within the constitution, scrapped Article 370, scrapped Article 35A, and transformed the princely state into a union territory. And they did so with a simple objective. And the simple objective was that Kashmir is no more a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan. So their large-scale objective is to deny an agency or even a humanity to Pakistan. So we have now domesticated the issue. It's a problem of, it's solely a problem, it's a domestic problem for, it's a domestic conflict for India, right? And they've denied it. So in their worldview, their strategy is a strategy of hegemony, a strategy of changing the status of Kashmir and changing the status of the nature of the conflict in their estimation, in their worldview, from a bilateral conflict now to a unilateral conflict. So Pakistan does not matter anymore. And the question that I ask myself is, have they been successful in doing so? What are the lessons from the last 4 years? And the answer, in my estimation, and please feel free to disagree, is that no, they haven't been successful in doing so. And the reason why they've not been successful, because Kashmir still remains at the boiling point, right? So the peripheralization, the discrimination within Kashmir, it continues, the bleeding and suffering in Kashmir continues, and as long as that continues, Pakistan will always find a voice for the Kashmiris within the Kashmir conflict. So the paradox for India is, and their policy is self-defeating, that the more they try to domesticate the Kashmir conflict, the more internationalized it becomes. Right? So it's a self-defeating policy. They can't succeed. So that's India. What has been the dominant strategy for Pakistan in the recent past vis-a-vis India? Now, the most dominant strategy is encapsulated in what I call the Kargil syndrome. So the Kargil syndrome, the policy that will instrumentalize these non-state actors, these jihadist actors against India, with two broad purposes, with two broad objectives. The first objective is a military objective that we will impose costs on India. And the second broader objective is that if we impose these costs on India, then the Kashmir issue becomes internationalized and the world is attracted towards Kashmir. And then again the question, has Pakistan really been successful in imposing costs on India? Has it been really successful in internationalizing the Kashmir conflict? India is now, in a few years' time, it will be the third largest economy in the world. And the answer is no. What has happened as a result of the policy that we've pursued, that we've been branded in the international community as a revisionist state, as the destroyer of peace and stability in South Asia. We have damaged our international reputation. We always ask this very innocent question, why is Pakistan seen so badly by the world? And the reason is exactly this, the instrumentalization of such actors, these destabilizing actors. So our image, our reputation, right, our strategy of basically putting costs on India, it has had the reverse effect. So we branded it as a revisionist state. And more recently, I think, and Rabia will speak more about it, I think it undermines our quest for economic security. As long as we are branded as supporters of non-state actors, it will always have the reverse effect and it will undermine our quest for economic security, and we have suffered recently, with the FATF grey listing, with the terror financing allegations, right? So again, so the policy of the dominant strategy that Pakistan pursues, I think as opposed to strengthening our case against India, as opposed to strengthening our case on Kashmir, it has had the opposite effect, weakening our case against India, and even weakening our position or our stated objective with respect to Kashmir. So being this what it is, the self-defeating policies that India and Pakistan pursue against each other, I think we need to go beyond this threat perpetuating, these threat generating machineries that we have in both states. I think we need to move beyond it. And the slight optimism that I have about India and Pakistan, that these pathways for regional cooperation, security, associating together, doing business, doing trade, it is embedded within both states. It's not something extraordinary. It's not something abnormal. It is already there. And the point is to tap into it. So I hope that this problem or this of the tragedy of, I call it the tragedy of strategy, that South Asia has faced with the strategic competition between India and Pakistan, I hope that it is transformed, replaced with a logic of the shadow of the future, where India and Pakistan together can see how their states and societies and cultures are, or their people are, down at the bottom end of society in the next 15, 20 years. And most importantly, as I said earlier, that they try and find harmony and stability, despite the contradictions. So these contradictions and conflicts will never wither away. But the only point is to find that stability, and as long as they can do so, and at least learn to resolve their conflicts without recourse to war and violence. And this is where I'll end, and I hope I've made sense. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Farhan. I would now like to request Dr. Abia Akhtar for her presentation. As you know from this booklet, she is the founding director of the Center for Security Strategy and Policy at University of Lahore. She is also the founding director of the School of Integrated Social Sciences at the University of Lahore. So, over to Dr. Abia.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I'd like to thank the organizers, Dr. Ellinor Zeino, regional representatives of Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, and Professor Dr. Shaista Tabassum, Dean, Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at University of Lahore, University of Karachi. Please don't quote me on that. For inviting me to this very timely international conference on a very important topic on South Asia and regional connectivity in the 21st century. I'll be speaking to you about South Asia and a need for a shift from geopolitics to geoeconomics, but I'll primarily be focusing on Pakistan. And as you have heard Dr. Farhan make the statement that India and Pakistan are the problem in South Asia. And if you resolve both of them, or even one of them, at least, that's the starting point to talk about any positivity with respect to regional broader connectivity. So I've recently authored a report with Dr. Moeed Yusuf, who's a former National Security Advisor, and it is titled Geoeconomic Pivot, Strategies, Challenges and Opportunities, and it's published by Frederick Ebert Stiftung, and we are doing a launch in Islamabad on 23rd of November, so if you're there, please do join us. The approval of Pakistan's first national security policy document, which came out on December 28th, 2021, marked a significant milestone in the country's pursuit for a comprehensive national security and non-traditional security, traditional security threats. It talked about a whole range of diverse national security threats that Pakistan has within the context of ensuring safety, security, dignity, and prosperity for all citizens, all of us sitting here, citizens of Pakistan. This perspective represented a welcome departure from the historically narrow view of national security, which has often prioritized hard security at the expense of other aspects of human security and human well-being, something to which, again, our earlier panelist and Dr. Farhan has also alluded to. So of particular note in this national security policy, if you've read it, was the emphasis placed on economic security as a key aspect of comprehensive national security for Pakistan. The policy recognized the importance of augmenting economic security as a means of achieving better outcomes in the areas of human as well as traditional security. Now, this recognition is especially important in the light of ongoing debate, which is not really an ongoing debate, but a forever debate between guns and butter. In order to address countries' geopolitical challenges, the national security policy stressed the importance of geoeconomic paradigm, something to which your Vice Chancellor alluded to in the earlier inaugural session. Pakistan's pursuit of geoeconomic objectives was supposed to serve as a means of strengthening country's economic muscle while also supplementing its efforts to address security concerns. And the policy recognized that a secure and prosperous Pakistan can play a more active and positive role in regional as well as global affairs, augmenting the country's voice and influence in the process something to which Dr. Ellinor alluded to in her remarks, that Pakistan's presence needs to be felt in various corners of the world, let alone Europe. So before we move further, let us unpack as to what does geoeconomics mean. The subject of geoeconomics is closely related to geopolitics, so it's not entirely divorced from geopolitics, with the key difference being the use of economic instruments to pursue national interests and create geopolitical advantages rather than relying solely on the military might. Now, the use of economic instruments to promote and defend national interests has become a defining feature of modern geoeconomic strategies. The impact of other nations' economic actions cannot be ignored when considering the pursuit of geopolitical goals. This is an important distinction from geopolitics, which primarily focuses on the role of geographic factors in determining state power. By contrast, geoeconomics considers a broad range of economic elements when predicting the outcomes of international relations. So this is the perspective that is for geoeconomics, so keep that in mind as we proceed further. Now let us take a look at what has Pakistan's business as usual approach has been and why it is not sustainable any longer. And something to which our keynote speaker talked about earlier in his inaugural address was a need for introspection, for need for hardcore calculated truths, something that we are uncomfortable with, talking about not only amongst ourselves as citizens, as nations, but also at any other forum. So it's time for introspection. Throughout Pakistan's history, its leaders have strategically positioned the country as a net security provider in the West, a key partner to China, and an important ally to Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia. Now, this approach has been successful in soliciting foreign economic support, as evidenced by handsome assistance inflows from Western countries as well as other partners, particularly during periods of great geostrategic importance for Pakistan. However, this model has been structurally flawed and has created damaging consequences for Pakistan's economy in the long run, as we are all witnessing today. One of the most damaging aspects of this approach is its tendency to generate a psychological orientation that constantly seeks out assistance and bailouts from external patrons such as the West, China, as well as the Gulf allies. This orientation has allowed Pakistani decision makers to continue to delay the structural reforms needed to gradually move the country away from this reliance and on external assistance. Instead, successive governments have repeatedly pursued a short-term financial gain strategy through reliance on international aid rather than undertaking reforms that would enable the Pakistani economy to become more self-sustaining. That was the first flaw in Pakistan's strategy, historically speaking. The second major flaw in the model is that it has been centered on external inflows, primarily driven by security compulsions of the country's partners. Over time, these inflows have reinforced the elite capture of Pakistani economy, leading to resources being channeled towards unproductive sectors, massive tax evasion, and the growth of a parallel informal economy in Pakistan. Now, rather than promoting genuine productivity and export diversification, economic growth in Pakistan has been generated primarily through elite-led import-based consumption. Now, this approach has further reinforced the dependence on external aid rather than developing a self-sustaining and diversified economy that can support long-term economic growth and stability for Pakistan. Now that we have identified that Pakistan's business as usual approach is unsustainable, let us talk about what needs to be done in Pakistan and how. I'll make 2 points here. Number one, the geoeconomic paradigm aims to revolutionize the utilization of Pakistan's strategic location by emphasizing connectivity and development partnerships with the entire world. Pakistan needs to act as a trade, transit, and production hub connecting West, Central Asia and South Asia, transitioning from primarily assistance-based relationships to prioritizing trade and investment relationships with countries beyond its geopolitical boundaries. By focusing on enhancing its connectedness with a diverse range of partners, even those that may not be strategically aligned with Islamabad, Pakistan should aim to build positive interdependence and raise everyone's cost for an unstable Pakistan. Number two, the success of Pakistan's geoeconomic pivot, as the national security policy talks about, would require the implementation of policies that promote domestic as well as regional peace, which would be further reinforced if Pakistan's partners and adversaries alike extract dividends from Pakistan's newfound economic stability, something to which Dr. Farhan also talked about, that without peace in the region, you cannot move forward. In turn, these key stakeholders stand to lose significantly if Pakistan destabilizes, thus strengthening the incentives for Islamabad to continue striving for economic prosperity and positive regional interdependence. Now, this prioritization of productive economic relationships would offer Pakistan greater independence in its foreign policy decision making. It will reduce Pakistan's constraints imposed by seeking recurring bailouts under duress. Let's talk a bit about connectivity projects. For connectivity projects, Pakistan should prioritize realistic options with a multiplier force effect. Focus on negotiating and advocating these as part of its broader economic diplomacy, which we see absent in various corridors of power. China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, my fellow panelists' inaugural session talked about it, is vital for Pakistan. However, hurdles in phase 2, they need to be overcome. Instead of hyping CPEC as a BRI's litmus test, highlight that its infrastructure is open for investment in special economic zones and other areas, and create incentives for the Gulf partners and leverage their presence to attract more Western partners. This will make Pakistan's melting pot approach a reality, something which is not currently happening, and China has not stopped us from inviting other partners to invest in special economic zones that are part of the broader CPEC project. In terms of connectivity initiatives, regional energy projects may be strong candidates for positive interdependence. However, the current geopolitical environment does not allow you, as in Pakistan, to execute them without challenges. Improving rail and road connectivity between Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran would be more achievable and could open up Central Asia and West Asia to Pakistan in the medium term. Extending CPEC to Afghanistan would benefit all three countries and direct Chinese investment in Afghan rail and road infrastructure, and this would also overcome some of the financial hurdles. Pakistan can also enhance border trade and transit infrastructure with neighbors, especially Afghanistan, to reduce business costs. Additionally, exploring digital connectivity offers numerous opportunities and can be a powerful force multiplier. But we all know this. There is no new information here. You've heard it countless times before. My fellow panelists have talked about the benefits of cooperation over conflict, which is a no-brainer. It is absolute common sense. We all know what needs to be done, that Pakistan needs to adopt a range of strategies from industrial policy to social safety nets, political reforms, economic reforms, social reforms. But why is it not being done? And perhaps that's a question that all of us as citizens of Pakistan, its academia, scholars, experts, just regular clusters of civil society need to ask Pakistani elite. And this brings me to two final points that I want you to think about, because I don't have answers for them. And as academics, our quest should be to raise more questions in a quest to find answers for them. I think there are two things on which collectively all of us, including myself, all of us, have failed Pakistan. The first is elite consensus. There is an absolute lack of elite consensus on the strategic trajectory of Pakistan. I really don't care as to how do you define elite in Pakistan. whether it's the politicians, whether it's the military, whether it's the bureaucracy, whether it's your business lobby with billionaires who today, if they had faith in the system, could pay off Pakistan's entire debt. But because they do not have faith in the system, they are not going to come forward and do that. So the elite consensus is missing in Pakistan as to where do we want to take Pakistan. And if you really don't care, if you don't have a plan, if you don't know where you want to take Pakistan, then none of it matters what road you take. It really doesn't matter. Why are we having this conference or any other conversation on taking Pakistan somewhere when there is an elite consensus missing that this should be the trajectory of Pakistan? And no compromise, irrespective of who comes to power, no compromise on that consensus will be made. So that's my point number one. My point number two is lack of political stability in Pakistan, and therein lack of policy continuity. When one government comes, the other government thinks that whatever time, money, energy, intellect has been spent in generating new projects for Pakistan are all worthless because you don't align politically with those, powers that be. So you throw out the policies and there is zero continuity. We are doing another project, and we are looking at several countries who have achieved GDP growth. And it is amazing that all those countries with similar trajectory like Pakistan, similar time frame since independence, have achieved phenomenal growth because they had elite consensus and they had policy continuity and political stability, which allowed them to undertake reforms. We like to compare ourselves with India. So let us see what India has done in the last 20 years, what Pakistan has failed to do in the last 20 years. Similar geographic space, right? Manmohan Singh's 10-year rule, 10-year rule. Modi's 10-year rule, onward, going on to another 5 or 10-year rule of BJP. And let's see what has happened in Pakistan in the last 20 years. I will share a list of 13 prime ministers, including caretaker prime ministers, that we have had in the past 20 years. While India has had 2, we have had 13. Mir Zafarullah Jamali, Chaudhry Shujaat Hussain, Shaukat Aziz, Muhammad Mia Sumro, Yusuf Raza Gilani, Mir Hazar Khan Khoso, Nawaz Sharif, Shahid Khaqan Abbasi, Justice Nasirul Mulk, Imran Khan, Shehbaz Sharif, and now Anwarul Haq Kakar. And with these 13 prime ministers, zero political stability, zero policy continuity. Pakistan is not going to go anywhere if we do not have elite consensus where to take Pakistan, set a strategic direction for our country, and irrespective of what government comes, have consensus that these pillars, if it is the geoeconomic pivot, moving away or shifting a little bit away from geostrategy or geopolitical constraints, then do not compromise and let Pakistan, at least give Pakistan 5 years of stability and move in that direction. Do this experiment. And that's my message to everybody, that if Pakistan has to succeed, these 2 things are my solution for Pakistan. I'll end here, and I thank you for your attention. Look forward to the Q&A.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Farhan and Dr. Rabia Akhtar. The floor is open for question answer. The speaker should introduce himself or herself and try to be brief, please.
Hello everyone.
Whom are you addressing to?
Everyone.
Everyone.
Yes.
And who are you?
So my
Please.
name is Abdul Samad. I'm a researcher based at a think tank called CIS,
Okay.
Yeah, so my question is for everyone. So there's this argument made that we cannot trade with India because that would be harmful for the economy. So when we had the MFN, there was a lot of backlash from all quarters. So do you think that this is a factually correct argument, that trade with India would be harmful for our economy, in the fact that India would capture our market share, dumping, some of which, I mean, our trade with China goes along those lines as well. Yeah, and my second question, Dr. Rabia, you said that there is no elite consensus in Pakistan. To play a devil's advocate, I think there is a consensus, and that is responsible for the way we are right now. Thank you.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for the question. I think one of the problems, and I'll say it's an acute problem, that we face is a very India-fixated, India-centric point of view, even when it comes to geoeconomics or economic cooperation or economic integration. So yes, India is the larger economy, and classical economics would tell you that the larger economy will gain more compared to a smaller economy. But let's say if this trade opens up, do you think we'll only trade with India? We'll not trade with Afghanistan? We'll not trade with Iran? We'll not trade with China? We'll not trade with the rest of the world? So this is how simple economics works. Economics works by the principle of that if you have costs in one area, so for example, if there are costs in our trade with India, we balance it out with profits that accrues to us from Afghanistan. If we have costs with our trade with China, we balance it out with profits that accrue from Iran, right? So again, this argument about India, dumping their economy onto us, right? I think it flows from a very India-centric, India-fixated viewpoint. And that is not what geoeconomics is all about. There is not India that we have to trade with only, right? So the region opens up, the benefits flow, right? And again, if you look at the terms of trade between India and Pakistan, there are sectors that we benefit from. The textile industry, for example, right? The clothing industry, for example. There are other areas we lose out. And this is how economics work. So I think we have to radically disband this India-fixated, India-centric notion, especially even geopolitics, even when it comes to economics, right? And I think it's an unfair statement to make because there are other countries beyond India that we can trade and benefit from.
Thank you, Fran.
Thank you so much, Samad. That's one way of looking at it, but I'm talking about a positive trajectory and having elite consensus on it. If it was left up to me, I would just hang a board and say Pakistan is not available, like let's say for the next 5 years. And we're not available to US, we're not available to China, we're not available to Afghanistan, to anybody, because we want to set our own house in order. And then I would just get Pakistan's topmost billionaires to do a zero-meter Pakistan, pay off all the debts, and just give 5 years and not take their money outside Pakistan for 5 years. And do you think if their money, their wealth is going to be in Pakistani banks, if development will have to take place in Pakistan, we would not get somewhere in 5 years? We would get somewhere in 5 years. Pakistan has had terrible leadership crisis, and now today there is no faith in any leadership, right? But if we do come together, if the politicians, the military, the civil society, the business lobby, the bureaucrats who you think run the country come together and decide that for 76 years we've been like this, but for the next 76 years we refuse to be like this. I think that kind of conversation needs to happen in Pakistan, and perhaps a push needs to come from all of us, because we all are fed up. So just like by raising our placards and saying that, we don't want status quo, we still are, accepting the status quo as the elections are approaching, right? But at some point, we hope that this generational change is going to come and push and set Pakistan in a direction based on the potential that we all realize we have and everybody else fears. Thank you.
Just Dr. Monis Ahmed, please.
Thank you very much. I have enjoyed both the presentations, and my question is about, both the panelists. Rabia, you talked about Moeed Yusuf's national security document. What happened to that document? Number one. Number two is, you talked about two solutions. Where is will, determination, and when we talk about solutions, don't you think that in the last 75, 76 years, we are talking about the recycling of ideas, right? And the solutions basically are very clear, but there is no will, there is no determination. And then, of course, the current account deficit of Pakistan, today in a newspaper it has been mentioned, is now only $74 million. So there is some achievement. What I want to ask is that regardless of the fault lines in Pakistan's politics, in Pakistan's economy, in the governance, in rule of law, in accountability, don't you think the crux of the problem is the deep state? As long as the deep state is there, and you know very well what is meant by a deep state, that state has denied people. That state has denied people legitimate rights. That state has denied people a viable democratic political process. So unless something is done, and I agree with you about the elite consensus, but they are part of the problem than part of the solution. Second, Farhan, you talked about India. Okay? I need to know that what I gather is that till the year 1998, India was very much interested in mending fences with Pakistan, was very much interested in having trade, in this connectivity, people-to-people interaction. But then what happened? Now, the Indian state is not interested about Pakistan. They are saying, and of course you can agree or disagree with the narratives that there was Kargil, that there was Pulwama, there was this Mumbai thing, something like that. But they have reached to a conclusion, and there's a consensus as far as the Indian elite is concerned, whether you have the Congress or you have the BJP or you have other political parties, that we have nothing to do with Pakistan. And for that matter, it has derailed the process of regional cooperation in Pakistan, in South Asia. Look at SAARC, where it stands. And when we talk about, all such things, that there should be trade and commerce and win-win situation for both these countries, but the Indian side is not interested anymore. And that Indian mindset, which is basically led by BJP or whatever, that has persuaded Bangladesh, it has persuaded to some extent Nepal, it has persuaded to some extent Afghanistan, that we cannot have regional cooperation in South Asia unless Pakistan is able to, according to their point of view, deal with cross-border terrorism, deal with other things, but we have our own arguments. So what do you think about that in coming, 15, 20 years, with Indian economy, look at the Indian economy, that it is now the world's 5th largest economy. It will be the world's 3rd largest economy by the year 2028. The Indian foreign reserves are $700 billion, the GDP, the GNP, how much India earns from tourism. So there's a focus. Our problem is, in case of Pakistan, the lack of focus. The Indian-centric approach is there, but that approach is hurting Pakistan. That approach has not benefited as far as the well-being of Pakistani people is concerned. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. It's a pleasure to see you and hear from you. So the national security policy, like all other policies of Pakistan, was not adopted by the government that came in the past year. There was not even a national security advisor to the government that was there, which shows you that, what kind of interest the government had to carry on with that policy. But that's where the problem is. With all due respect, I think the deep state, Pakistan is not the only country with deep state. All countries have deep states. United States has deep state. China has a deep state. India has a deep state. But has that stopped them from achieving that consensus as to where to take their country? The problem here in Pakistan is that, even if the deep state exists, the consensus is missing for the betterment and positivity of Pakistan, because the deep state has been, entrenched with that security, overarching security dynamics, securitization of everything. And now when the national security policy says that we don't want to take the security dilemma and the security conversation away from you, all we want is to just make a pivot to geoeconomics, because if you are strong economically, you will be better able to take care of your state's security issues. That's the conversation, and that twist needs to happen, and for that ownership and buy-in, you need to have political stability. And so I'm not sure if with the elections and the new government coming in, how is this thing going to go forward, but even for the national security policy to come at a time when it came, it had some sort of consensus within, the powers that be. So at least I have some hope that once we reach that state of stability, we will come back to this national security policy and take this forward. So deep state to me is not a problem. It is part of the problem, but it is also part of the solution. So without that, no state is functioning, but it's not stopping them on achieving their goals with respect to economic prosperity. I think Pakistan can also do so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I will just make a brief comment on what you said, and then we move on to the next question. I will just say that every state has in every state you have a deep state. In Pakistan, you have a deeper state. Please.
Thank you, sir. For those who don't know, Professor Dr. Monis Ahmed was my PhD supervisor. And as good teachers and supervisors do, they really push their students by asking tough questions. So that's a really, really tough and hard question that you've asked. And that was the point in the presentation, that India is not interested. And where do we go from here? Now what we have seen post-2019, that if there is an Indian objective, it is primarily conflict management. And this we saw when India and Pakistan agreed on the LOC ceasefire, February 2021. So the objective from the Indian side, as we see, is very minimalistic. So Happy Mon Jacob, for example, says that we are now living in an age of minimalism. Between India and Pakistan, this only conflict management strategies will continue, and these deeper conflict resolution mechanisms might not come in the near or even the long term or the medium term future. And that is the exact problem. So about India, now India under the BJP we know is clamoring for a hegemonic and an operational superiority in South Asia. So to speak, following the same model as Israel is doing in the Middle East. But look what has happened in the Middle East in the last 6 weeks. This notion of operational superiority of the Israelis is challenged radically by Hamas. And when that happens, and what is happening in the Middle East, and the same problem repeating itself in South Asia, and as you rightly pointed out, that will continue to repeat the cycle of violence and wars. So countries like India, by clamoring onto operational superiority, countries like Pakistan, with the support and instrumentalization of non-state actors or jihadist groups, for example, They continue to believe that they might achieve what they intend to achieve. But what we see is the exact obverse happening. So if India is not interested in speaking to Pakistan, I think that will not work in the longer run. India has to speak to Pakistan. Pakistan has to open up to India. That's the only way going forward. Otherwise, this tragedy of strategy that I call, that will perpetuate, and that is not beneficial for anyone within the South Asian region. Thank you.
Yes,
Assalamu
please
alaikum.
introduce yourself.
Sir, Assalamu alaikum. Sir, this is Irfan Zaidi.
Mic दे दें इधर. Oh, okay.
This is Irfan Zaidi. I am a visiting faculty member at the Department of International Relations. My question is for any one of you. You people are expert. Like we have seen this South Asian and regional connectivity. It's not a new thing on the block. It's an old phenomenon. We have tried our level best, India and Pakistan, to foster peace between each other. We have done cricket diplomacy, cultural exchanges. We share common waters, common borders. But whenever we come across and we come closer to each other, to establish long-lasting peace, something takes it all down the drain. May I know, is there an element of conspiracy theory from outside the region, or I know the phenomenon, but I want you all to enlighten the students. Thank you.
Next will be you, okay? Just a minute.
Should I answer? Acha ji, I remember when we were doing this project at the Department of International Relations about lessons that India and Pakistan could learn from the peace process in the Middle East in the 90s, a project which Dr. Monis was heading. And the one thing that we constantly spoke about during this time was the role of spoilers. That whenever a peace process ensues, there are always spoilers, right? And the spoilers want to keep the status quo as is because their interests are served in the perpetuation of the status quo. So I spoke about Narendra Modi coming to Pakistan, December 2015, breakfast in Kabul, tea in Lahore, dinner in Delhi. What happened 2 weeks later on that 9th or 10th of January? You had Pathankot, right? So the spoilers in the peace process who are not interested in transcending reality to new horizons, they are the ones that need to be taken care of, right? And yes, so that's the answer. And that is the reason why we've had these fleeting moments. For example, India and Pakistan, for example, the Musharraf-Manmohan Singh phase. So Pakistan gave a security guarantee to India of sorts under General Musharraf that cross-border terrorism will be controlled from our side. And that security commitment actually laid the basis of peace, right? So we've had these moments where they commit to something, but again, I think the spoilers, so to speak, win over, and that is where all the trouble starts.
Yes, please. Please give the mic to her.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mehreen and I am an IR student. My question is from Dr. Farhan Siddiqui. Sir, you discussed the India-Pakistan cooperation and conflict from the Kashmir perspective. Another aspect of this dichotomy is arms build-up in the region and a lack of regional security architecture in the region in terms of arms control, sir. Would you like to comment on this? Thank you.
Meaning, thank you for asking the question, but arms control is not really my area. I think it's Rabia's. Rabia, can you comment? Meaning, I think, yeah.
I know you didn't ask me this question, but not a problem. So I do look at the security architecture in our region. And so in addition to India and Pakistan's conflict, what India has recently done is that expanded the definition of South Asia to include China in it, and now they're calling it Southern Asia. So as an IR student, when you read the literature, And wherever the term Southern Asia comes in, you need to know that it's a push from India because it refuses to talk to Pakistan bilaterally on the security issues and wants China on the table. And China has got nothing to do with what is happening between India and Pakistan. And when it looks at, and as Farhan also talked about, there is no nuclear equation between India and China because China is conventionally really superior. So China is not going to talk arms control with India. So it's a deflection point for India because it doesn't want to talk arms control with Pakistan and talk about Pakistan's security dilemma emanating directly from India. So that's one part of the problem. And the second is the presence of United States as an extra-regional force in the region, because of which China is modernizing both its conventional nuclear forces, and that is creating or amplifying the security dilemma for India. And whatever India is doing is amplifying security dilemma for Pakistan. So this is called in literature a strategic chain, whereby whereby United States is at the front end of the strategic chain, followed by China, followed by India, and Pakistan being at the tail end, absorbing the entire shock. So there can be no arms control architecture in South Asia because of the asymmetries between these dyads. First dyad is India-Pakistan dyad, and the second dyad is India-China dyad. And the third is China-US dyad, right? So these asymmetries are now going to bring these parties to the table. You've studied Cold War, and why Cold War arms control architecture was successful because the United States and Soviet Union achieved a certain parity in numbers. They had the Cuban Missile Crisis to push them towards stopping at a number, looking at arms control, landscape differently, and think about a safer world. We have not reached that point in our region yet because there is no parity between any of the dyes. And these asymmetries are perpetuating. They're increasing day by day with more modernization, with AI emerging technologies coming to our region. So it's becoming more and more difficult to talk peace. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Should I wind up now?
I think we can take one or two questions more.
Okay.
I think he had a question. Sure.
I hope I'm audible. I am. So my name is Cyrus Royek. I'm speaking here as a private person who's currently a guest, as a German Navy officer, guest of the Pakistan Navy in Lahore. By the way, thank you very much for the well-reflected lectures. Thank you very much. I was recently in Muzaffarabad, and I got the chance to get an exclusive insight in this conflict, and it was several times emphasized that as a prerequisite, an UN resolution or following a UN resolution and plebiscite will solve the conflict, and that then, so to say, secondly, this region will face a vast economic development. And having said this, playing the devil's advocate, in light of that, several times it was emphasized that they will follow the rule-based, so to say, United Nations stance. What is wrong with this? To follow this stance, so to say, what is wrong in following this approach? Thank you very much.
I'll just briefly answer your question and then I'll give it to Dr. Farhan. Dr. Farhan in his speech talked about, as to how post-2019, now after India has revoked the statushood of Kashmir and altered the situation, it no longer is interested in talking about UN resolutions and freedom for Kashmir. Now, having said that, what India is doing since 2019 is buying more time, and that's my thesis, and you can disagree with that. There is this Domicile Act that they have passed whereby, Indian citizens can now come and take property, live in Jammu and Kashmir as if it is not a contested territory anymore. Prior to that, when there was statushood, even under UN resolutions and the conflict was alive, the Indian citizens could not come and take property, territory, their children could not study, they couldn't do business. But now with this Domicile Act, the demographics are going to be changed. And once the demographics are going to be changed, so now we say that there are 8 million Kashmiris that we need to fight for and liberate. That demographic 5 years down the road is going to be completely different. And at that point, India is going to come to you and say, you wanted plebiscite? So yeah, let's have plebiscite. And they would have the numbers, they would have the Indian citizens who would surpass the 8 million Muslim population that is there and fighting for their freedom. That is the time buying tactics, and I think it is sort of a fait accompli for Pakistan. And we can continue to say that no, it is not, but I think India has played a superb shot, which really has cornered Pakistan into finding solutions and bringing them back to the table. But that's what I think.
Meaning your question was about why the plebiscite is not a favorable option. Is that what the question was about? Meaning what does the, yeah. If I could just quickly answer, I think the ingenuity or improvisation that was shown by the Indian and Pakistani leadership came with the 4-point formula in Kashmir, 2002, 2003. And for 4 or 5 years, they were discussing to put in a new formula beyond the UN resolutions. And the core of the peace formula, it was not about a peace agreement as much as it was part of a peace process, that you create a people-centric framing of the issue within India and Pakistan at the elite level and at the mass level. And then from there on, go somewhere and see where you can come around and have a certain agreement of how to resolve the Kashmir conflict in a way in which it does not head into the direction of war and violence. And I think that was very interesting and remarkable again. So the idea is still on the table. You still have Indian and Pakistani who have to speak about this 4-point formula, demilitarization, local autonomy, people-to-people contact, right? And I think that's a way to get ahead. And then the plebiscite, meaning generate enough confidence within the two countries, within the Kashmiris on both sides of the border, and then start to go somewhere we can deal with the plebiscite and the UN resolutions. And I think that's a fair way to address the conflict. Yes, exactly. Yes, that's a big question, agreed. Yeah.
We will be
Next,
taking
please.
the last question after this.
My name is Rizwan Zaib. I'm with the Air College. My question is to Farhan. I think the first time this wish was that to have breakfast in some place and then lunch and dinner was expressed by Manmohan Singh, and he was quite keen on that, unlike Modi. And I'm also glad that you talked about the spoilers. So my question refers to the peacemaking or the wish of Modi as the peacemaker. Do you think Modi actually can be the Menachem Begum in South Asia, in keeping his political ideology and whatever his politically stands for? Would he be willing to let go of all what he had fought for throughout his years? And if, Rabia, if you want to pitch in, I'll be very happy. Thank you very much.
Oh, well, thank you for the correction. Modi as peacemaker, at one time he was, but that is again the tragedy of South Asia, that as long as conflicts remain unresolved, like the Kashmir conflict, these conflicts only become more and more protracted. So the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because it was not resolved, meaning there was a great resolve in the 90s, but since it was not addressed the way that it should have been addressed, the conflict only becomes more protracted. So again, and the same with Kashmir. So yes, Modi was willing to make a deal. In 2015, there was enough bonhomie between Modi and Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif at the time. And they were speaking about these visions, about connectivity, about cooperation. But because the tragedy of South Asia is that we have always had these missed opportunities, meaning this was a very good opportunity that we missed. And the Modi that we have of today is on a completely different trajectory. As we know, because he's pandering to his domestic constituency, he's pandering to his Hindu nationalism, he's pandering to his time and power, he's appeasing the nationalist and the religious lobbies, the majoritarianism in India. So I think that was a good enough moment, and Modi could have made the deal provided if things remained stable in South Asia, and that's the entire tragedy. So again, as I said earlier, the only motivation from the Indian side we see is to maintain a minimal conflict, that there are stable borders, that we oversee that crisis management is done, for example. I think the bigger problem for Modi and India is that whenever a crisis emanates with Kashmir as the core point, it delegitimizes India's position on Kashmir, and it brings back Pakistan in. Because then the question of what is happening internally and what policies the Indian state and the BJP are pursuing, right, comes back to haunt Narendra Modi, comes back to haunt the BJP, comes back to haunt the Indian state, right? So even this predilection of Modi today, I think that cannot work. But yes, I think he was willing to make peace in 2015. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabia and Farhan. It was a very lively session.
We have a last question. Do you want to
Thank you very
ask?
much. Just shortly, I'd like to thank both speakers, and particularly I like the point also of Dr. Rabia saying that the main obstacle to peace and prosperity is a lack of strategy and not the deep state. I find it's a very thrilling new idea. Just one question on regional connectivity, because it's usually thought as a positive concept. But for me, it's a neutral concept. It has to be filled with something positive or negative. So do you also see some risks that an increase in regional connectivity can also increase conflict and increase inequalities or, well, have a negative impact? Do you also see those risks and tendencies? Thank you.
I think that's an interesting question. We have not had connectivity based on the potential of all states in South Asia. We have not had that for the longest time. So I think that should answer your question, that the negative is already there. That space is not empty.
Yeah.
Negative is already there. And taking from that point and moving onwards then requires a strategy and this space needs to be filled with the positives, because we have experimented with the negative long enough, 76 years of hostility and border issues and influence campaigns and, domination and perpetuating hostilities. So the negative we have experimented with, and what have we got to lose experimenting with the positivity? So even a little spark of hope, is going to help. And just going back to what Dr. Rizwan Zeib asked earlier about leadership, I think leadership is a variable which is the most understudied variable in IR when it comes to South Asia. And, Pulwama Balakot crisis, if you look at that and as to how the leadership did not, took certain decisions that it did not reach the second round of escalation, does not get enough acknowledgement from the Western scholars as well, because they are like all gung-ho that no, this is going to tank. This region is a nuclear flashpoint, and now look what other regions are nuclear flashpoints in the world, and South Asia is not. So there is hope, and if enough impetus is given, to the leaders, and more empowerment is given to them to leave their legacy, I think they will move towards cooperation, and they would want to mitigate, the effects of conflict. So for me, it's negative is already there. The space is not empty, and now we just only need to move towards the positive, and even one little spark is going to help gain a momentum, and I hope it's between India and Pakistan.
Okay. Thank you, Rabia. Both the presentations were academic in nature. A lot of hard work was done in the preparation, and new ideas have been floated. And discussion, we had very short time, but it was of good standard, good questions were raised, and the forum should be open for question and answer. It always happens that we are having shortage of time and we can't have a longer question answer session. I was reading a book and the author writes that the entire 20th century was a mistake. I don't know if I can say that the entire 75 years of Pakistan was a mistake or not, but it definitely was from the 1980s onward. When globalization came in, when China opened up, when India opened up, and see where they are and where we are. It's very important to realize that Pakistan needs to cease to be a teacher of the world. It needs to be a student. It doesn't need to teach connectivity to China, doesn't need to teach connectivity to India, doesn't need to teach connectivity to Central Asia. It should teach connectivity to itself, because it has missed so many buses, and now Pakistan has to walk on. There is no bus for it. You see? So it's very important that, international conferences sometimes produce world-changing ideas. I hope that the conference here, organized by the Department of International Relations, will offer creative ideas, and it should remain Pakistan-focused rather than India-focused. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Professor Sikandar Mehdi, to present honorary shields to our esteemed guest speakers. Sir, can you please do the honors? Sir, please present the shield to Dr. Farhan Hanif Siddiqui. A picture. Next, to Dr. Rabia Akhtar, please. Now I would like to invite Sir Naeem to join us on stage and present a shield to our respected chair. Thank you so much, everyone. Now we have arranged lunch for everyone. So all of you are requested to go back outside and have lunch and join the session back at 2:30. Thank you. 2:30 p.m. sharp.